Yeah, he can remember snowstorms in like April. And I love the cold. I love snow. I like watching snow. But even April is a little too much for me. Like, you gotta have spring poke its head out eventually.
I hate watching TV shows where it's got snow in it. It's just
Really?
ugh.
TV shows?
Oh yeah, some show where they're filming it and they're out in the wilderness or something. And it's snow, and I'm like, I just.
Oh, I love watching it. I love snow. I love to watch it through a window. I don't want to interact in it. I don't snowshoe. I don't snowboard. I don't ice fish. I don't want to shovel it. I don't want to make snowballs. I don't want to really even touch it. I'll go out on a porch, maybe, and I'll go out and watch it. I don't want to deal with it, though, but I like to watch it. It's very odd. It's very odd. I think what I need like a home in like northern Alaska, but I want to be able to walk around in like a bathing suit. So maybe just keep it at like 85 with heated floors. But I'd love to watch a snowstorm at all times. So
Not for me.
For everybody listening, this is Ken Moffett back in the saddle for Exodus Volume 3. And with that, I will let you take it away, sir.
Hey, well, good to be here again, Tommy. I'd like to, I don't know if you can see this book, but this is one of the primary sources I used.
Okay.
It's called Studies in Exodus, Moses, and the Gods of Egypt, and it's by John Davis.
Okay.
And it's an excellent, excellent book on this topic, and it goes through pretty much much more in depth than we've been able to do here. But it's an excellent book, so if anybody's interested, Studies in Exodus, Moses, and the Gods of Egypt by John Davis, I'd highly recommend it.
Okay, awesome. And you texted me and you said you wanted to work through the plagues quickly. Just full disclosure, Ken, like we can do 1 million Exodus episodes. There's no rush. We don't have to. It's up to you.
Well, okay, let's see how it unfolds.
Yeah, take your time, man.
We're on the 6th plague, and the reason I kind of wanted to do that was because the 9th and 10th are pretty interesting, and I wanted to get into them a little more detail because up to now, the plagues 1 through 5, and we'll start with 6 today, have dealt with, Pharaoh is affected. There's no way he could not be affected, but the ninth and 10th plague not only affect all of the Egyptians, but are directly shots at him. And I want to take a little extra time for that, but if we work our way through it, and next week we're not done with these, then that's fine. We got, and then we've got the itinerary, how they actually got to where they're going and stuff like that. And here's another little tease, is that the actual crossing of the Red Sea, which we'll either get to next week or the following week, is not what people for hundreds and hundreds of years have been led to believe. There was a mistranslation in the Septuagint. And for those that don't know, the Septuagint was the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, that was translated into Greek. One of the pharaohs, Ptolemy Philadelphus, who was a descendant of one of Alexander the Great general's son, when Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, his kingdom split up. The only two that are really relevant as far as the Bible is concerned, or anything to do with the Jews or Hebrews, would have been General Ptolemy, and General Seleucid. They split up, and at this point, later on, obviously, General Ptolemy, his son, his family got Egypt, and then with the Seleucids, were constantly battling over who's going to get Israel or Palestine at the time. Well, Ptolemy Philadelphus had this huge library, and it was supposedly one of the best, if not the best in the world, scrolls of everything supposedly ever written. And he wanted the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. So he had 70, actually there were 72 scholars, Hebrew scholars, came down from Jerusalem and translated into Greek so he could read it, the Hebrew Bible. Well, there was a mistranslation when they were translating Red Sea, it should have been reed, R-E-E-D, because of the reeds that grew, and they mistranslated it into Red Sea. And real quickly, because if you see the shape of the Sinai Peninsula, the sea at the time that goes up what is now the Suez, and the other one was the Gulf of Aqaba, both of them were called the Red Sea. They didn't differentiate the names. That was hundreds and hundreds of years later. So when they made the translation, they said Red Sea instead of Reed Sea. And this is an interesting point. And the reason that it's interesting and it's very valid is because for hundreds of years, they have assumed that they crossed the Red Sea when they didn't. They crossed the Reed Sea, which is much further north than where now, or that time, the Gulf of Suez would have been. So, and we'll get into that because it throws a whole itinerary to the north, what is in modern day, they call it the Negev, the southern part of Israel, that desert area in the southern part of Israel. That's where they went. They never went down to the southern tip of Sinai. And I'm not going to spoil it for everybody, but it's a fascinating study.
That's a weird kind of like a fork in the road of, you could maybe even say power. I mean, if you were the one translating the Bible, that is, I mean, talk about like butterfly effect. I mean, you change one word. How does that affect down the millennia?
Well, it has, and we'll get into that because it's thrown the whole question of, well, did the Exodus really occur? Because there's no archaeological evidence for it, where they think it was, and by they I mean past historians and stuff like that. And to be fair, though, they did not have the technology that we have today. I mean, we were able to pretty well pinpoint where this Reed Sea is because of NASA satellite photos. And we can go back and say thanks to the 6-Day War between Israel and Egypt, because the CIA satellites were taking photographs of all the Egyptian movements and so on and so, passing them on to the Israelis. But in the course of doing this, they were able to locate these ancient dried up lake beds, and which are now dry because of the Suez Canal being created. And this is where, even in Egyptian hieroglyphics, they're referred to as Reed Sea.
That's kind of crazy how that's what unlocked it, was CIA satellites.
Yeah. And then what happened was the archaeological advancements with ground penetrating radar and all of the different things that they're able to use to locate these different things. It is just phenomenal what has transpired as a result of that. But we'll get into that, and that's perhaps my favorite part of it, because it's proving, if you follow the itinerary of Scripture as a roadmap, you'll get to the point you want to be. It's kind of like somebody hands you a map and you say, well, I don't want to go this direction, I want to go another direction. But this is a direction you need to go to get to where you want to go.
Yeah, if you just follow it, you'll get there.
Yeah, but this doesn't follow my agenda, so I'm going to go this way. Okay, go that way, and you'll be wrong.
It's like you can see the skyline of the city and the highway's pointing you that way. Just stay on the highway. You will end up at the city. It's just it's a little curvy. It's a little topsy-turvy. You will get there. Yeah.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly correct. All right.
Let's jump into it.
So here we are at the sixth plague, which was the plague of boils. And this is found in Exodus chapter 9, verses 8 through 11. And one of the interesting things about this is that God tells Moses to go to one of these furnaces. I want you to do it in plain view of Pharaoh. I want you to take some ashes and throw them into the air. And the notion here is that as Pharaoh is watching these ashes fall, it's kind of like as the Israelites eventually got into the desert, manna. Only in this case, the ashes are going to create these boils, and Pharaoh is seeing all of this transpire. And we need to remember that all of the plagues that Pharaoh saw, he either was told they're going to happen or he saw at the exact time, such as the blood and the frogs and so on. God told him through Moses, this is what's going to happen. So he knew in advance. It wasn't some secret behind the back thing. Okay. And God wanted him to see that this is my servant, my man, my prophet Moses. He is doing this at my command, and every single thing he did this. But another interesting thing about this is that the priest, once again, who were supposedly above the fray of all this, they were affected by this too, and they couldn't, again, with some of the other things that happened to them when they were the vermin with the lice and so on and so forth, they couldn't even go into their temples to pray to their various deities to put a halt to this, because they were not pure, they were not clean, and as a result of this, they continued on, which shows that they were powerless too, as well as their deities. So all of these things are, again, directly pointing at the various gods of Egypt, either the 80 to 100 chief deities and about the 1,500 of their various sub-gods and so on and so forth, the village gods. But one of the main gods that this affected directly was Amenhotep, who was the god of medicine. And then you had Thor, Thoth. He was an ibis-headed god of intelligence and medical learning. The god of healing, Nefertum, was affected. Isis, another figure who was part of the Egyptian Trinity, she was affected by this. So all of these boils and various infirmities that were delivered upon the Egyptian people, the priests, and so on, another direct shot at some of the Class A Egyptian gods, if you will. And who's sitting back affected by all this? Pharaoh, the incarnation of Ra, the chief god, and he could not do a thing about it, which once again shows he was powerless, absolutely powerless.
Neil deGrasse Tyson said in his book, Accessory to War, how, I forget what the exact example was, but how some European explorers landed somewhere in South America, and they wanted, they landed and they wanted to resupply, so they told all the indigenous people basically to give us food, water, and stuff, and they were we're not going to. And the travelers, the European travelers, they had an astronomer with them who knew that there was going to be a lunar eclipse in 3 days, and the indigenous people didn't know. They were tribes, and the European, the captain of the ship was in 3 days, my God will blot out the moon, and if you still don't believe me, then I will have him basically destroy you and your people. And their king was we're not giving you anything. And 3 days later, there's a solar or a lunar eclipse, and they filled up their ship, and they're praising and praising and praising. But it was this sort of way to make them look impotent with whatever it's you kind of use that to demoralize the people. It's I can shift celestial bodies. You should give me some food and water. Yeah.
Well, this goes right back to what God told Moses about Amenhotep II. Once again, this is Moses' cousin that he's dealing with. That he's going to use his arrogance, his hubris against him. And you have to stop and wonder, all of these poor Egyptians are seeing all of this, and for centuries and centuries and centuries, they have been worshiping these gods, and these gods did absolutely nothing because they're not real gods. They're just stick figures, if you will, hieroglyphics on a wall under a temple, Egyptian temple. And all of these things that these gods were designed to protect them from are coming to fruition. And these gods are absolutely powerless to do anything about it. So you have to wonder, and Scripture addresses this, that the average Egyptian, when they see this, they're wondering, maybe that Hebrew God is the true God.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, look what he's doing to our gods. They are impotent, as you say. They're powerless. All of the different gods that they invoke still are not able to correct the situation. They're not able to combat it because this is a war. Mm-hmm. And Amenhotep II, he's the one that declared the war by refusing to let the Hebrew slaves go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
when the god is acting with impunity.
Yeah. What are the people going to do to Pharaoh?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. What can they do?
Yeah.
But they're the ones that are suffering the worst for it because, as we said, the elite in situations like this are always taken care of.
Again, I think we used the analogy last week with COVID, right? It's like, the senators, they're fine. They're fine. It's everyone else that's getting screwed.
Yeah, they're always going to get theirs. And the priests and the magicians were so horribly affected by this that they were not even able to stand up to do their things because they had boils from their heads to their feet. They were just, you can just imagine the pain they were going through, kind of like when the Bible describes what Job went through with all of his infirmities, his boils and so on, that they're probably thinking in their mind, you know what, Pharaoh, just let these guys go.
Just let it go. Yeah. I'm on my last, I'm on fumes right now.
Yeah. You're not going to win this.
Yeah.
There's no point in prolonging the suffering because you're not going to win.
Take it on the chin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you really cared about your people, you would.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You use the analogy of those explorers going into Africa. In the waning days of World War II, when Hitler's generals and everything, they knew it was over, and none of them wanted to say it's over.
It's over. Yeah. None of them did.
They knew what would happen to them. They had a piano wire hanging out of a barn ready for them if they said anything. And Hitler and Pharaoh, pretty much the same. I don't want to hear the bad news. I can see what's going on. I know the Russians are just right outside of Berlin. I know the Americans are on the Rhine. I got all that. But what do we need to do to win? We can't win. And this is what his people are telling him. One of the interesting verses I had pulled up, but my phone went off, is in Exodus chapter 10, verse 7, where his people, the court, his officials actually tell him, it's over.
Yeah.
We are not going to win this. And they say, how long will you allow this man to snare us? Do you not know that Egypt is ruined? It's done, Pharaoh. Let him go. He wouldn't do it. He would not do it. Mm-hmm. And they said that right after the locust plague, which we're going to get to in a second, but it fits into all this, that the drip, 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 drip. And as we said at the outset, this was not like 7 or 10 days or 2 weeks. These plagues probably took anywhere from 7 to 8, 9 months, perhaps, because we see that the various different types of grain that grew during this season, that was destroyed. The other grain that grew in this season, later on the flax, and so on and so forth. So this was a protracted period of time, and all the while Pharaoh's having to see all this. And his mind absolutely had to be racing. What do I need to do to combat this? And there comes to the point where Scripture doesn't say, except when we come down to the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, that Pharaoh finally relents because he sees that it is in fact over. The point going on.
Yeah. It's that slow psychological warfare.
Yeah.
Wear them down.
So the 7th plague is the plague of hail. And what's unusual about this is that Egypt, let me back up real quickly. millennia ago, before there even was an Egypt, the northern the northern Sahara, that region was actually a savanna. And the archaeologists and geologists have found ancient lakes. They have found where elephants and fish in rivers and streams and so on. So this is thousands and thousands of years before climate change, global warming or global cooling, whatever we want to call it to fit the political agenda. That's what this was. But now Egypt is a desert, and it is a warm climate, and what sustained them was the Nile River. So we know at one point they had normal rainfall, because that's where the elephants and other animals live. They found the elephant carcasses and the bones and so on and so forth. But now Egypt probably gets about 2 inches of rain a year. They may have seen hail, but not to the extent that they're getting ready to see it. Remember, all of these plagues were increased dramatically. These were nothing new that they hadn't seen, but now they are increased to the point where they're just devastated by each one of them. And they had to take notice of this. So here come these plagues, and the plague of hail is not only the hail, but it's accompanied by fire. And again, the crops that were not destroyed with other plagues, the hail wipes them out, and the locusts are going to finish them off here in a few minutes. But this would have been a plague that the sky god, Nut, N-U-T, should have been able to destroy or end. But once again, their chief god, Nut, is not able to do it. And it wasn't the only Egyptian god. The god Shu, S-H-U, was the god of air and the bearer of heaven. Why didn't he stop this? Because there is no such thing. Mm-hmm. These are human man-made gods. Seth, god of storms, protector of crops. Neighbor, god of grain crops. And again, Osiris. Osiris is really taking it on the chin here. She's getting hit for a lot of things because she was involved in so many various things. She's the ruler of life and vegetation, and she can't stop it.
She's the CEO that has to take the flak for something that one of her underlings did, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's Tim Cook of Apple having to be responsible for what happened at an assembly plant in China, right? Yeah. You got to tell you, it comes with the job.
Yeah. Who's the little Chinaman that I have to fire for?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got to go out and take it.
And the accumulative effect of all of these plagues, it wasn't like they had a plague and then they recovered, had another plague, had recovered. I mean, these are just boom, 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 mm-hmm. and they never had time to recover. They had already lost their fish, which was a main staple of the diet of the average Egyptian. Once again, the priest did not eat fish because they were considered unclean. And the priest had to remain their purity before they could go into the temple mm-hmm. to pray to the various gods who were ineffective. Killed off the livestock, which meant there goes meat, there goes milk. The flax, again, much of their clothing was made out of this linen, and Egypt today is still known for some of their fine linen. So now they've lost all of this stuff, and there's not a thing in the world they can do about it. But one of the other interesting things about this is, here again, Pharaoh, when are you going to step in and do something about this? He can't. Now, the flax that was mentioned, and I think that this is one of the interesting things that we kind of overlook on this, is that Egypt was known as, throughout the Mediterranean, as the breadbasket. And that's one of the reasons that Joseph's brothers went down there, Abraham went down there, and other people from other nations, other regions went down there during a famine, because the Nile was continually refurbishing and so on. And they would fill up their sacks, and they'd get the wheat and the barley, the spelt, and all these other things. They would get flax for the fiber to make clothing and stuff. So here you have these, trade is now affected, and it's not just affected between various regions of Egypt, it's other countries through the caravans that are coming down to get these goods and to trade with Egypt. We'll take this back. You get goods that you may not have here, just like international trade today. And we're going to look in that a little bit deeper if we get to that today, because it plays a very important part in the overall scheme of things in God getting this message out. This is not just a localized thing, and we'll see that shortly. But so the cumulative effect, the food, the clothing, the demoralization, the psychological warfare, as we've talked about, with the average Egyptian trying to figure out, how do I worship a God that doesn't exist? Or how can I count on this God when I keep calling on these gods and nothing happens? Mm-hmm. And you've got all these crossover gods. Okay, you're not doing it. How about the other God? He's not working. How about this one? And once again, where's Osiris? Isn't she in charge of all this? Mm-hmm. Where's Ra? Where's the Pharaoh? The incarnation of the sun god, our chief god. Why is he not stopping all of this? Mm-hmm. And you have to wonder, did the average Egyptian begin to... We know that the priest did, because back in the third plague, they told Pharaoh, they said, this is the finger of God. There's nothing we can do about it. Mm-hmm. So at that point, Pharaoh, if you believed in your priest, if you believed in your magicians, step back and think, okay, maybe I should cut my losses. But the arrogance plays in. Mm-hmm. I'll show you. Mm-hmm. So we go to the eighth plague, the plague of locusts. And the locusts, again, they come in and they wipe out everything that hasn't already been destroyed. And it's at this point in Exodus chapter 10, verse 6 and 7, that the officials, as I mentioned a moment ago, realize that the game is over. And they go to Pharaoh and they tell him that Pharaoh has been ruined. And it kind of reminds me of, and I'm sure you've seen the picture, the film, and most of the people viewing this probably have, The Hunt for Red October, mm-hmm. where the Russian submarine captain, because of his arrogance, is going to prove that he is better than Sean Connery's character or whatever in the world. And he's going to sink this American submarine. And he launches the torpedo, and they maneuver and so on. And as the torpedo is headed back towards his own Russian sub, one of his officers, they realize what has happened, and he says to him, "You arrogant fool, you've killed us all." Mm-hmm. Well, this is what's happening here. Pharaoh's officials realize that because of his arrogance and his refusal to let these guys go, let the Hebrews go, you destroyed this country. The nation that your father, Tutmosis III, gave you, the most powerful nation in the world at the time, has been destroyed because of your arrogance. Mm-hmm. And I think it goes back to the beginning of all of this, when God tells Moses, essentially, that I will harden his heart. Now, God is not making Amenhotep II do anything that his heart is not already predisposed to do. Mm-hmm. He's arrogant, and I'm not listening to this God that I can't even see. I don't see a God. What are you talking about? And Moses, okay, I'll show you. And he never relents. So now we have the plague of locusts, and they have destroyed everything that hasn't already been destroyed, or what's left. There's no leaves on the trees. There's nothing. And here again, we see the gods. The chief agriculture god, poor Osiris. I mean, she is really, really getting it. Isis, Seth, and Nippur, all of these gods of the air are still powerless to stop even the locusts coming through. The devastated fields that are battered by hail, burned by fire, now stripped bare by locusts, they all point to the impotence of the Egyptian gods. They cannot stop this. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, he's a retired minister, actually. We were in the Army together, and he became an Army chaplain, and he spent like 30 years after he got out of the military police. He went into the chaplaincy, and we were talking about this. And one of the things that he mentioned was the fact that it's difficult after the average Israeli to see this. The average Hebrew, they cross into the wilderness after fleeing Egypt, and they immediately began to grumble and complain about this and complain about that. And God actually describes them as stiff-necked people. It's one of those things. Okay, God, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
And but here we see all of this happening, and the Hebrews are witnessing every single one of these plagues. They know what's going on. So this is not done behind anybody's back. This is a full view of the Egyptian people, of the Hebrews, of Pharaoh, of his court, of the priests, of everybody. And if these gods were gods, they would see it happening too. Which you have to ask the question: if these gods were real,
are they there? Yeah.
Why can't you stop it?
Yeah, right. I mean, again, you can go back to Nazi Germany, right? Who truly believed that they were brainwashed to think that they truly were the Übermenschen. They were superior. So not only are these Allied bombers destroying their cities like Dresden, but it's also like, how are these inferior Brits and Frenchmen and Americans, they have black soldiers? What is this? And we can't stop them? It's so, where are our guys? Why aren't they stopping this? And it's like, at a certain point, it's almost like when you go to I don't know, maybe it's like collect the gold that your dollar's backed by, and you realize it's not there.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we've been hearing the propaganda that we are the Übermenschen, we are the elite, we are the master race. And at a certain point, it doesn't matter what the radio's saying. When you're watching, American GIs just bulldoze through the town, at a certain point, it's looks like a duck, walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, and the Nazis are telling you that's a horse. Eventually, you're like, I don't think so, man. But there's no greater way to prove a point than to show them there's, again, Japan, our god or our emperor is a god, and it's like, but then the U.S. drops like a mini star on your country twice. At a certain point, no amount of propaganda can erase what they're seeing with their eyes and ears.
That's an interesting point about the propaganda, because that's what the various reliefs and the hieroglyphics were, that the pharaohs would use them as propaganda. That was common in the ancient world, that the ancient emperors and so on of these various nations, whether it was Assyria, later Babylon, pick an ancient country, that's what they would do. They'd have these reliefs, hieroglyphics, carved into their tombs, their monuments, and so on. But one of the other interesting things about that as propaganda was that they would put it into the temples. And it was a way of telling these various gods that Pharaoh Amenhotep II, look what he did, or Tutmosis III, look at all of these great things he did. But they're just carved into stone. And the average Egyptian may or may not have been able to do that. But the propaganda went out that, look what your Pharaoh did. He conquered this, he conquered that, and so on. And that was the main reason for these being done, in addition to keeping a record, because the ancient Egyptians believed that if your name was eradicated, then you never existed. And if you were a pharaoh, and somehow, as they tried to do with Moses' stepmother Hatshepsut, to eradicate her name from all of her monuments, everything, because she didn't exist. And once again, why didn't they want to admit that she didn't exist? Because, well, perhaps she was a female. We can't have a female pharaoh, even though she was an effective pharaoh for many, many years. But she's the one that brought this little Hebrew baby out of the Nile, and here he is, the one that's causing all these plagues to come down on us. Mm-hmm. And then they later on tried to eradicate everything. And if you go back and you look at some of the documentaries done about this period, Tutmosis III, Hatshepsut, and Amenhotep II, they're trying to figure out, okay, which one was it that actually went through and tried to obliterate her name? Because once again, if the name's obliterated in the eyes of ancient Egypt, you never existed. out of sight, out of mind. Kind of like what we're doing today in the United States.
Let's say a little 1984-ish, right? Or 2021-ish, right? They removed Donald Trump from Home Alone, and they replaced him with a CGI character of someone else. If that's not... But yeah, right? It's you're trying to, right, remove the past, get rid of these statues. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. And it's also... I was going to say there's no way that, like... So with, like, the Egyptian, like, propaganda, there's, up until then, it was believable, because if the Egyptian propaganda just says, our God created the earth and the sun and the air and the water, and they just say it, and there it is carved in a stone, well, here you are, and there's a sun and air and water, and, well, I guess it is. Okay, you're right. But now it's being put to the test. So here comes these plagues, and it's like, well, how can you stop this real quick? And when they're not doing that, well, it starts to unravel everything. You're like, did they really create the water? Did they really? You know, it seems like it was the original psychological warfare.
Well, it was that, and the average Egyptian, he got it a long time before the Pharaoh did, simply because he was the one that was no longer going to be able to eat the fish. Yeah. He didn't have any grain. He didn't have any flax for his clothing. How was he going to trade to make a living? And so on. So he was the one that was affected by it a whole lot more than the Pharaoh was. You know, an interesting point about that, we can quickly jump into the New Testament when the Apostle Paul is up in Ephesus and he sees this magnificent temple dedicated to the god Artemis. And they had all these little mini silversmiths were making all these mini statues of Artemis, and the Apostle Paul was able to point out that these are just man-made gods. They are not real. Many people began to believe Paul, converted to Christianity, which caused an economic effect on these silversmiths. So what did the silversmith do? They tried to have Paul killed. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't like the message, kill the messenger. And so here you are. All of our gods are impotent. So what do we need to do? How do we get rid of this Pharaoh? You can't do anything about it, but it's affecting me economically. So what are you going to do for me?
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, it's the loose string on the sweater is being tugged and the whole thing's unraveling, right?
The train has left the station, Pharaoh.
Yeah, but just like Japan or just like Hitler, if you don't unconditionally surrender, like the beatings will continue, or the beatings will go on. The beatings will continue until morale improves, right? It's like, right? You're not surrendering, Hirohito? Send out the bombers again. Like LeMay is chomping at the bit. You know, it's just keep it going. It's going to keep going, and it's not going to be fun for you or me, but it's going to keep going. We've got these nifty new A-bombs.
You know, it's interesting you mention that, because you would think that after Doolittle's raid that they would have got the message that, as Yamamoto said, that sleeping giant, we awakened the sleeping giant, and he can now hit us. Maybe we should really step back and take a look at this. We haven't gone so far yet that we can't turn this thing around.
Yeah. But again...
But in Japan's case, I know it's a little bit far afield, but Tojo, the war minister, he was all in. And it's, you know, I'm not the god over here that's going to take the hit on this.
Yeah.
I'm just doing what Hirohito tells me to do, but we know in reality Tojo is running the show.
Yeah. But with those fanatics, you often have that, where it's like, right, with Tojo, or you could, who was it, Bormon? Was it Bormon? Whoever, it's like these higher ups in the inner circle. They're fanatics, but it's because they don't have to bear the brunt. Like, whereas we might say, hey, man, they were faithful to Hitler to the end. The reality is they were faithful because they were going to send other men to die. Like, they still didn't have to do anything. It doesn't really take a whole lot to be like, fight to the end, when you're not the one fighting to the end, right? When a lot of them were saying fight to the end, and then they were saying, like, okay, we're going to, you know, we're putting in, a lot of them would put on, like, glasses, shave their beards, and like, okay, now we're going to escape on a train to Switzerland. And it's like, it's very easy to be a fanatic or an ideologue. when to define yourself as such only requires you to say 10,000 men go fight to the death. You're not the one picking up the rifle. You're a lot of them slipped out, right? So it's
And once again, Pharaoh's affected by this, but the average Egyptian was taking the brunt of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that brings us to the 9th plague, and the last 2 plagues, as I indicated, are particularly of interest to me because they affect Egypt as a whole, but they're directly shots at Pharaoh, in my opinion. The 9th plague is the plague of darkness, and that's found in Exodus chapter 10, verses 21 through 23. And I'm going to read this because it's important. I know that I haven't read a lot of the verses pertaining to the various plagues, but this is in Exodus chapter 10, verse 21 through 23. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand towards heaven, that they may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand towards heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did they rise from their place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Remember, God had said back after the 3rd plague, I believe it was, that, okay, from this point on, none of these plagues are going to affect the children of Israel living in the land of Goshen. You guys are going to take the hit on this. But my children, my guys, the children of Israel, they're going to be free from it. They're going to get a pass on this. Now, imagine that the world as you know it suddenly goes so dark you can't see anything. And I don't know if anybody out there has been in a position to where it has been that dark, if you've ever been in a cave and so on and so forth. But it's something to behold. I've been in, explored caves and things like this. You can't see members of your family. You can't see anything in your house, the stools, the bed, nothing. You cannot see anything. You're bumping into all this. Your entire world has gone dark. It's gone black. And the darkness is palpable. You can almost touch it. Scripture says that you can feel it. And you can feel it pressing in on you because and at this point, you've got to be afraid. This goes on day after day. Egypt is a country that sees about 365 days of sunlight per year. But for the people that are used to that, and all of a sudden what you see is darkness today, darkness tonight, darkness the next day, darkness the next night, darkness the next day, darkness the next night. This had to be terrifying for them. And the plague of darkness was a judgment on Egypt's religion and its culture in general. Of all of the gods of Egypt, none were worshipped more than the sun god, Ra. The sun god, variously known as Ra, Re, Atum, Aten, had become identified with the supreme god, Amun. Amun, or Amen, however they wanted to pronounce it, Amun-Ra was thus considered the greatest god of Egypt, and who was the incarnation? Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And he was viewed as the creator, the giver of life, who flooded the land with all this brilliant sunshine that helped our crops grow and our lives are comfortable down here. Now, one of the interesting things is when you look at the breakdown of the various names of Ra, Amun-Ra, Re, however they're going to pronounce it, many of the pharaohs incorporated into their names of that chief god. For instance, Pharaoh Ramses, who's going to come along in about 200 years. His name, Ramses, means to be drawn forth of Ra. Amenhotep, the one that Moses is dealing with, his names means Amun is pleased. And here's one that everybody's going to love, Tutankhamun, better known as King Tut.
Yeah.
His name means the living image of Amun. So the next time somebody says King Tut, his name is Tutankhamun, which incorporates that Amun in there. But in the darkness, again, Amun-Ra, the most powerful god, was what? He's not to be seen. He's not in the ballpark here.
Yeah.
Elvis has left the building, and Amun-Ra is with him.
Yeah.
And so not only were all of Egypt's other gods and goddesses powerless, but the greatest and the most important god, Amun-Ra, Pharaoh, was just as powerless and useless to help them. Again, the Egyptian gods had failed. And this goes back to something we've reiterated time and again. You can look at our own culture, the breakdown of our own cultures. Some people say that we're in a civil war, in a cultural war. And I believe with all my heart that we are. And why is that? Because the American population, the world population, has decided that they're going to worship all of these other gods, whether they're athletes, whether they're singers, entertainers, whether they're industrialists or whatever. They are going to become our God. We don't need Yahweh. We don't need Jehovah. We don't need the God of the Bible, because he doesn't give us what we think we want. But in reality, when we look at exactly what he did for the Hebrews, he gave them everything that they needed and sometimes what they wanted, but he knows best what we need before we even need it. And it's just a powerful look at why we choose to follow these fake gods, because they deliver something, and if they don't deliver it, so what?
Yeah.
You know, I'd rather follow the celebrity because that celebrity is cool. You see how many people follow such and such on Twitter, or how many friends do I have on Facebook? You know, I'm a celebrity and I've got 50,000 or 100,000 people following my every word, even though most of them are just absolutely bumbling idiots.
Yeah.
You know, they just parrot what somebody else says.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was Bill Hicks, the comedian, who was like, we follow these famous people, and he's like, but they have the IQs of a lobotomized rock.
He's giving them too much credit.
Yeah.
But you know, we had discussed the Egyptian concept of Ma'at, but here we see that Ma'at, Pharaoh is supposed to hold all of this together, but God is deconstructing Egyptian society. He's throwing it into absolute chaos. And once again, the Egyptian god of Ma'at, control, is battling the god of chaos, Set. And these two gods are battling to each other. But in reality, they don't exist. Mm-hmm. It's God against Pharaoh and God against the Egyptian gods. And it's no contest because they don't exist. But in the mind of the Egyptians and Pharaoh, they do exist. And what God has got to do is prove to them, and he does very forcefully, that those gods that you believe in, they're non-existent. Mm-hmm. And you better wake up before it's too late, Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. So with all of his hubris, Amenhotep has now met the God of the Hebrews. And if you remember what we read back in Exodus chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, when we started this study, when Moses went to Pharaoh and he said, this is what the Lord God of Israel says, let my people go. What was Pharaoh's response? Who is this God that I should obey him? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. And at this point, Moses is probably thinking, well, Pharaoh, my young cousin, meet Yahweh, mm-hmm. God of the Hebrews.
Yeah.
And you're not going to like the next one. The next plague that comes your way, you're really not going to like it, because it's going to hit you personally hard.
Yeah. Should we save that for next week?
We can certainly do that.
Oh yeah, I don't want to start it and then have to finish it quickly. I'd rather not rush it, because that's
and that's fine. Another little tease about this. This is one that a lot of people, a lot of so-called archaeologists and Egyptologists, depending on where you are, whether it's the liberal side or the conservative side, struggle with, because they can't realize that what God says about the firstborn child, that includes Pharaoh. And one of the interesting things, I did a lot of research on this, and I'll save that, but it's because we'll get into it. And next week, we'll probably spend most of the time just doing the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. But this is going to hit Pharaoh to the point where he just I give up.
Yeah.
I give up.
Yeah. It's the unconditional surrender.
But then he changes his mind.
It'd be like if Hirohito surrendered and then tried to attack him. But even Hirohito wasn't that dumb.
Yeah, he sends the kamikazes.
What's the ship where they signed the
Missouri?
The Missouri. Yeah, it'd be if he tried to kamikaze the Missouri.
Yeah, in his own harbor.
Yeah, man. We would rain down. I mean, yeah, there would be Japan would still be smoking. It would still be irradiated. But point is even Hirohito wasn't that dumb.
No.
It takes true hubris.
There comes a point, we can look at our own history. Even Robert E. Lee realized when it was over. There were many in the South that wanted to continue on. But Robert E. Lee, he realized that we can't fight against the industrial might of the North. And, the interesting thing, and I know this is kind of far afield, but if you're watching this, you probably like history. One of the interesting things about the American Civil War is that the South had all the talent.
Mm-hmm.
The leadership of the South were some of the instructors at West Point. They were West Point generals.
Yeah.
They had been involved with the Mexican-American War with General. Well, that comes way later. We're at 1848.
Oh, I was thinking early. Never mind. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
And all of these generals were lieutenants and captains and majors that had developed their skills in the Mexican-American War are now generals in the South, but they didn't have the industrial might that the North did, and they could not keep up with, if you can use this term, and I think it's accurate, the technology that the North was developing. The railway system in the North, which allowed them to move supplies and other materials and weapons and men, et cetera, a whole lot quicker than the South could, because they just didn't have the railway system. And the industrial capability of the North it just couldn't be matched by the South. And that's what we're dealing with here, is that God is the North and Pharaoh is the South. He cannot match the capabilities of God.
Yeah. To be continued. Ken Moffett. Always a pleasure, sir. Professor Ken. Dr. Moffett. Dean Ken.
Dean Ken.
You be the dean or the principal.
That's right. That's right. You guys do your homework.
Do the homework. And tune in next week. Ken, as always, it's a pleasure. And I thoroughly enjoy. I normally have to do like all the talking. I thoroughly enjoy. I get to be the student, and I've come to look forward to it.
Good, I appreciate that.
I'm being sincere. It's, as I say to everyone, I don't have anyone on the podcast I don't want to have on. It's a one-man show. I don't have any board of directors like, we'd really like to see some more Ken. I am Hirohito. I am the emperor. I give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. So if I have you back on, it's because I enjoy it. But I do enjoy get to switch roles, and I get to, as I said, Professor Ken. I get to sit back.
Consider this sort of like your Sunday Bible class.
Yeah. It's I did 2 podcasts. I did one this morning and I did one after, and it's, you have to guide that. You have to guide those. You can't let there be any dead air. You have to. I've come to look forward to this because I sit back a little more, and I'm like.
I'll be honest with you, Tommy. I'm really getting. I've had a lot of people ask me, "How do I get in touch with Tommy? How do I get in touch with Tommy?" I'm serious, and I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. I'll have him send me his contact, unless you want me to give your contact information to them."
Yeah, give him my email.
Okay.
Give him my
I'll
email.
do that. But when we finally get into the itinerary of actually where they went, and according to the Bible, not according to some of these half-baked archaeologists, that's fascinating. And then if you're thoroughly not thrilled with, you're not thoroughly not fed up with me, I would love to come back after we're done with all this and do the trial of Jesus from an actual historical Hebrew perspective, Jewish perspective, as the violation of Jewish law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I did a in-depth study on that, and I actually taught a class on that. And I learned so much that I was able to impart. And the best part is when you get the feedback that I never knew that. I never knew any of that. So hopefully
I don't see a reason why not.
Excellent.
Again, I am Hirohito. If I want to have on Ken every Sunday, I'll do it. And if someone doesn't like it, again, then feed them to the lions. Get off my podcast then. It's as long as I'm entertained, I'm going to keep having you on, Ken.
All right, excellent.
Thank you, sir. You have a wonderful Sunday. 5 p.m. on the nose. Beautiful. All right, Ken, I'll text you when this one's up. I got 2 more to upload before it, so this one will probably be up.
That works for me.
Probably this time tomorrow, it'll probably be up.
All right, that's fine.
All right, Ken. God bless. God bless America. Everyone stay safe out there. And Ken, as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Tommy.
All right, my man. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.